It's football season whenever you see incessant shots of that fat, shirtless fuck in the snow, in the stands. Cleveland Browns are playing, and you constantly have the director becomes obsessed with this guy. After a while, you're thinking that he's even calling plays, but we got a lot of that last night in what appeared on paper to be maybe a very dull, unappealing matchup between the Cleveland Browns and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Steelers were rolling. People were starting to give them consideration. I don't know, possibly as a Super Bowl contender, but maybe a team that was going to be very dangerous, was going to get into the postseason and possibly be on a roll. They were rolling coming into this game. You got the Cleveland Browns, 2-8, going against an 8-2 Steeler team. You're only getting 3 and a hook. That was kind of curious. The over-under total was rather tepid also, so perhaps giving consideration to what were supposed to be very imposing weather conditions. Now, we didn't see it so much in the first half of that game. We certainly did in the second. And you had the turnover machine, Jameis Winston, quarterbacking for the Cleveland Browns, who, as backup quarterbacks go, as erratic as he is sometimes and as careless as he can be with the football. Hell, I think they had 3 turnovers in the second half of that game and still prevailed, the Cleveland Browns. Jameis at least puts you in there with an outside chance to go ahead and win the game. And if you look at the 3 wins so far this season for the Cleveland Browns, did they beat Pittsburgh twice? They have a win over the Ravens, and I believe they've beaten the Steelers twice. So the Steelers now 8-3. Cleveland Browns 3-8. You didn't really have to sweat too hard on the point spread. It was in jeopardy there for a little while. But when Winston responded with, surprisingly, I think that was either his 15th or 16th professional comeback with a game-winning drive to close out the scoring in the fourth quarter after trailing. So he's had his moments, and he certainly did last night. It was very entertaining, but the obsession with the guy with the no shirt on, and you really felt like it was a football season. You thought you were watching Chuck Mercine catching a little pitch from Bart Starr there and taking it into the flat and skating his way to a few yards, finally to get the Packers into a position for Bart Starr to go off Jerry Kramer's now famous block, indelibly impressed upon the craniums of anyone. I happen to be watching that game. That's how old I am. And there you had Lombardi saying, way to go, boys, in the famous frozen tundra of Lambeau Field for the Ice Bowl game. It kind of looked a little bit like that last night. But you know that football season has arrived. As soon as you see that big fat fuck out there just yelling and screaming and urging his team on as the Browns came up with an improbable victory. That's the way the week started, and that was one I'm talking myself out of. The odds are prohibitive. But I'm talking myself out of the idiotic proposition that I was putting forth and trying to convince myself might have been a good move just to have a little fun, which was what we've talked about here on the show, a very popular bet, a very popular maneuver. And that is going ahead and betting all these chalk money line parlays where you're having 6, 7 teams that are all favorites and you're betting them on the money line, which if you're parlaying 6, 7 teams, there's a chance that you're going to get screwed somewhere along the line. All right, if you are betting these games, and there's a full slate of just about everything going coming up this week, and the place to go, of course, would be Bet Online. That's the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action, the ability to watch the games and bet on them as things are taking place. If you thought Jameis was going to run in on that 4th and 2 last night, you would have been able to punch that up, and you would have been in pretty good shape. The largest selection of odds on everything from football, NBA, NHL to entertainment, political props, all available to you at BetOnline. Head to BetOnline today to get in on all the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. BetOnline. The game starts here. All right, we're going to dive into a little college football and some plays here on the program today and some other things as well, as we'll be joined as always, and there he is, popping up right on cue here. The professor joins us here on the show. Professor, how are you, my friend?
Could be worse. I could be in Cleveland.
Isn't it true, though? Emblematic and signifying the real start of the football season is the obsession that all television directors have with that big fat fuck with no shirt on that's always in the stands at Cleveland Browns game. It could be a variety of different people, but they picked out a guy last night
You
who was
want that guy for last night, right? Because that's a dude who's going to go out and beat a seal to death for your wish, for your meal in the middle of that goddamn like I would say honestly, the obsession is not TV directors. The obsession is people who live in these cold weather states are like, yeah, that's real football. You play in the snow. You play it. Why? Who the fuck wants? Who wants to sit in the middle of a goddamn blizzard and watch the Browns play the Steelers?
Have to credit. I mean, how insane are Browns fans that they were all? They kept alluding to this throughout the telecast. Wow, everybody's still in their seats now. Now the game turned out. I thought it was wildly entertaining from a lot of different angles.
It got more entertaining once the snow started. I'm not debating that part of it. I'm debating that. Look, we go down here and we have historically some pretty good football between the University of Miami and the Dolphins. But how many times have you and I had this conversation? Hey, Defa, you want to go to the Dolphins game? Nah, the traffic sucks. Nah, it's a little too hot. These people are sitting through a goddamn blizzard, and I mean, who knows what? I assume the traffic in that really sucks. I assume if you were at that game, it took you like 4 hours to get out of the stadium parking lot because it was snowed in. Yeah, I
There's
don't.
nothing but slush and mush there,
Right.
and you're trying to drive out of there at midnight.
Again, and down here in South Florida, we're notoriously shitty fans.
Yes.
But like, how many times have we like, hey, I got front row seats to the Marlins game. Where you want to go? And parking's a pain in the ass. Yeah.
No Blackie. Yeah, you got the guy with the line in Little Havana saying that you can park your car there. Guarantees it won't get blocked in. And then, of course, when you come out, there's a Winnebago behind it. And
right? The Heat are playing for the goddamn to go to the championship, and we're like, nah, Bayside sucks.
Yeah. Forget about the Orange Bowl national championship. Who gives a fuck? It's better.
I don't want to go to that. These people are through a fucking blizzard. They end up to the north time.
All right, we're going to get into some college plays, but we were talking on an earlier program that we just finished off a little while ago, and you brought up a brilliant thing that I think is very pertinent to the gamblers. Now, I did want to mention a few of these things because you were talking about the biggest cinch bets, and some of which you made, and some of which you didn't make.
Correct. And I was so upset by the one I didn't that I couldn't figure out how to work the link to get on the show for a couple minutes.
Yeah, and I mean, you did unload on that one with Coach K making the Final Four when it was rigged.
In his last year, yes.
You brought up a couple of really interesting ones, not the least of which was Andrew Luck as a number one pick overall versus RG.
I put a caveat on that one because people really love these days to bet on the NFL draft. This was in 2012. I don't know how big a thing betting on the draft was at that point. It might have been a super low ceiling bet where like you could only get like $500 on it. But yeah, in retrospect, if people remember the 2012 draft and the run up to it, Andrew Luck had been the lock number one pick for like 3 years.
Yes.
Like teams after his freshman year at Stanford were lining up to throw games to get Andrew Luck as the number one pick. And then in his senior year, Robert Griffin III came out of nowhere in Baylor, went to the combine, set a record for the 40 time that I think still stands for quarterbacks. He ran a sub 4.40, had an amazing workout, had an amazing college career, won the Heisman and whatnot. And so, much like Peyton Manning and Ryan Leaf, where you mentioned it, Rick Meyer and Drew Bledsoe, the media tried to make it like a question, like, is there a chance they won't take Andrew Luck number one? They'll take Robert Griffin, which, in retrospect, there was absolutely no chance in hell, particularly the Indianapolis Colts, because let's be honest, the state of Indiana, they're not trying to draft a black quarterback. Again, this is home state of the Indiana Pacers, who will go just randomly find white guys to draft.
And the ownership, comes under somewhat fugazi mental competence, and you would have to imagine,
to say the least. Yeah, the odds that they were going to pass up.
Not be something that they, would necessarily be failing in. That's for sure.
The odds that they were going to pass up Andrew Luck, the whitest white quarterback in the history of white guys.
Exactly.
Were 0.0.
And he was minus 200. And
only minus 200.
Yeah. That was a gift. I mean, you were talking about this in reference to the Jake Paul fight. Like, what didn't you see about the idea that at minus 200, Jake Paul was the easiest money that you could ever make in your lifetime.
Which a lot of people have been talking about this week.
Yes.
I will tell you, I didn't play it. If I had played it, I would have bet Tyson. I just don't. Honestly, this is probably one of those you didn't do enough research because I did not watch the last two Jake Paul fights where he fought guys. He was bigger than they were both cruiserweights, but they were legitimate boxers. They were guys with good records who were not MMA fighters, professional boxers, and apparently he fairly dominated both of them. There's a group of people out there who think Jake Paul is a somewhat legitimate heavyweight fighter. I have no way to judge it because honestly, I've never watched a Jake Paul fight up until last Friday night. Maybe he is. I have no idea.
Yeah. He's one of those guys that, having done a lot of boxing, and you're always rooting for the one-round knockouts in the prelims if you're doing a televised boxing match, because you just want to get those out of the way and get to the main event and hope it's exciting enough to keep the audience engaged. And he would be one of those guys that comes in with a nondescript record out of the Midwest that comes in to fight the house fighter. And, his job is to last like a round or two, and that's about it. But he would be capable of being that, I think, in the pros, which would not make him the worst guy that we've ever seen step into the ring. But to fight Tyson, if Tyson looked like any semblance of himself at any time.
Which obviously he was not going to at age 58.
Yes. And we were once again duped by pre-fight videos of Tyson looking great. It's one thing to go ahead and show off a little bit and throw a couple of solid shots at the heavy bag, but for some reason the transition to actually doing it in the ring requires a lot more than being a 58-year-old whose last fight was 20 years prior and you got knocked out by Kevin McBride.
Yeah, again, there are a lot of people who are discussing this as if it were a generational bet, as if it were McGregor, Mayweather, those kind of things. Mayweather was obviously heavier odds than Jake Paul was. And maybe so, but again, I can't speak to the legitimacy of Jake Paul as a fighter. And that's the problem I actually have with the conversation is people are now talking about it as if you can just throw any 27-year-old into the ring with a 50-year-old or 58-year-old Mike Tyson, and it's an obvious bet. Well, no, I can tell you, at 27 years, when I was 27 years old, 58-year-old Mike Tyson would have beaten my ass.
No, Paul has done enough to, kind of not really legitimate whole campaign, but at least make it representative of being something other than the total complete farce it's being painted as. And yet, that being said, the money was there, and there were still other bets, and the one you came up with that I think we have to touch on.
Oh boy, please don't make me
plus 380 that you were getting in the Olympics. With
they
may as well have thrown Antonio Margarito in there against a bunch of 140-pound women. But
everybody's got a story with some sort of was like, oh, somebody told me about Microsoft when it was selling for $5 in 1982, or this real estate I could have bought, or obviously the most recent one is Bitcoin. Somebody told me about Bitcoin when it was $100 15 years ago, on and on and on. I don't even want to say this. I'm such a schmuck. I read a story about this girl from Algeria actually being a man like 4 days before the tournament started. And, oh, by the way, she's plus 380 to win the gold medal. What? Mixed gender boxing and you get the guy at plus 380?
That was pretty incredible.
And again,
how did we whiff on that?
This is the Olympics. This isn't some low cap, low ceiling thing. It was very easy to get big money down on this. I don't know what the hell I was saying. I don't know how I passed on this.
Imagine it. They were handing you almost 4-1. And
they
you
were
had
just
no
saying,
chance of losing. I mean, this woman was hitting as if Panama Lois had cut the stuffing out of her gloves.
Come here, give us $1, and for every $1 you give us, we will give you $3.80. And we're just going to hold it for like a week and a half for you because there's zero chance that this. I mean, honestly, what would have had to happen for her not to win? Like,
it was impossible. Would have to have been disqualified in the middle of the competition.
Like the Simpsons episode where Homer's fighting the world champion and Moe tells him, visualize how you're going to win as a congenital heart defect has felled the champion on his way to the ring. Like, that's literally, she didn't have a heart attack and fall down on her trip to the ring. She's gonna win.
Yeah.
So like, how do you not cash this?
Bad
That one
decision.
will haunt me. Like I said on the other show, that will wind up being my white whale.
Yeah. Corrupt decision could have done you in, much like Roy Jones Jr. versus the
I
Cleveland.
suppose it is the Olympics, but
It
again,
always happened in the Olympics. The French.
like half the women she fought, she tagged them once and they just fell down like screw it.
Oh, they started
Yeah,
crying immediately. Yeah.
yeah,
Busted nose. They looked like Larry Zonka. I mean,
yeah.
after his 27 carries in a Super Bowl game. All right, we want to get to making some money for the people out there. Bury Your Bookie. This is the professor, ladies and gentlemen. Hasn't been his best of seasons, but I can vouch for this man.
Has been my worst.
Long time. What with the college football, but you know what I like about it? I believe you're going to bounce back and
Hope
have
so.
strong close. You don't have the bowl season to clean up on, which is usually.
But we do have the playoffs. We got a lot
Yeah.
more legitimate matchups. We're already seeing some of the preview lines. I think we're going to have some real opportunities there. But we want to, heat it up headed into the end of the regular season here.
All
So
right.
hopefully we're going to do that.
Even if you're swinging negatively from a percentage standpoint in some years, if you happen to emphasize certain games and have a strong feeling about them, and you're right about the game of your life or whatever, then you can make amends for what otherwise was not necessarily the most profitable of years, or at least hang in there. But you do have a game that you kind of have a ring around so far this week.
Yep, we do have one
Yeah.
to take one of those big swings at, and that is Texas A&M laying 2.5 to Auburn. Again, the circumstances of this game, Texas A&M is missing their top running back, Le'Veon Moss. But again, they were basically a running back by committee team to start with. Moss only about 150 yards ahead of the season of the guys, their second leading rusher. And again, they got a nice boost with E.J. Smith, Emmett's son, who had a good career at Stanford before transferring and hadn't played that much before Moss got hurt, but looked pretty good in Texas A&M's win last week. Now, again, it was over New Mexico. That's not necessarily a performance to write home about, but Auburn doesn't have anything to write home about on either side of the football. Their defense is not up to their usual standard, although it's not bad of their two units by far the strongest. The problem for Auburn is not only is their offense unproductive in terms of putting points on the board, they turn the ball over all the time, and you've seen that cost them victories against California, against Arkansas, a couple other spots already during the season. And if you're thinking, well, yeah, but it's a look-ahead game for Texas A&M because they got Texas next week, remember that Auburn's in a look-ahead position, too, because they've got Alabama next week. The only way Auburn is going to save their season is by pulling a monster upset. So they have just as much look-ahead as Texas A&M does. And honestly, Auburn lost in a look-ahead spot to New Mexico State last year when they were getting ready for Alabama. So look-ahead runs both ways in this matchup. Texas A&M, much better football team, and still playing for their playoff lives. If they went out, they're going to be in the playoffs themselves. Only laying 2.5 at Jordan Hare. Looks like a real easy spot.
All right, Texas A&M laying 2.5 against Auburn. Also looking at, and I used to love this game when I was a young cub reporter for the Ontario Daily Report. I almost call it the Daily Distort, which was our nickname for it. And the motto, of course, was yesterday's news tomorrow. We were a little bit behind on things, but we were on top of USC, UCLA. Great rivalry game on the West Coast. Doesn't carry the same luster around the country now that it did maybe back in the day. And I don't know that it was ever as much of a viewed rivalry as some of the other classic ones in college
I
football.
mean, maybe a couple of times through
Yeah.
the years, but yeah, not. It doesn't get the attention that Ohio State,
Doesn't
Michigan does.
resonate, yeah, like Ohio State, Michigan, or Alabama and Georgia at this point. But anyway, a good game. But you're not a big fan of the Bruins this year, and in this.
Again, I'm not anti the Bruins. They're in a huge rebuilding year, having lost their head coach Chip Kelly, lost most of their defense. Most importantly, it was the strength of the team last year. Now it's an interesting game because they were getting some burial type lines early in the season. Then they went on a little 3-game streak. They beat Rutgers, they beat Iowa. Both of them are pretty solid teams, but both of those were really super fluky games. The Rutgers is more of a defensive running team. They ended up in the shootout. Iowa, who have been better offensively, their offense went back to classic Iowa ineptness in that matchup. We faded them last week against Washington because we were saying they've been fortunate here, and it proved to be right. We're coming right back and fading them again. Again, look at a different situation. Washington last week, we're looking for more of a defensive game. This game, I'm looking for more of a shootout. I think UCLA will get a little bit more offense. just because the USC defense is still not good. It's inept. But USC's offense is not inept in the least under Lincoln Riley, and UCLA's defense is really, really bad. So again, Texas A&M looking for more of a low-scoring defensive game. USC, we're looking for a shootout, but we think USC will come out comfortably ahead, probably a couple scores. This game was 4.5 when we were talking about it yesterday. It's 5 now, but I think really up to 6.5, you're good. I don't see a scenario where USC doesn't win this game by at least a touchdown. So USC in a shootout, laying 5.
When Lincoln Riley first was named the head coach at USC, and he took half of his team with him, did you not think that this was going to lead to big things? How would you characterize Lincoln Riley's stay so far at USC?
I think, like a lot of coaches in different positions, adjusting to the new reality of what I mean. Look, obviously, I think Lincoln Riley's thought process was, I'll go out to USC. I will take my defensive staff with me. I'll get some of that Southern California talent on the defensive side of the ball, and we'll see improve. What turned out, Alex Grinch and that staff was just a total disaster. And again, entered into a new era. I think Riley expected a recruiting bump from that USC name and local talent base, but walked into a situation right in the middle of the portal and NIL where the hometown loyalty thing just doesn't really play like it used to. So we'll see. I would say up to this point, I don't know if it's an F, but it's like a D or a D minus, and we'll see if he can build upon this. I think really across the country, you're talking about a lot of different coaching situations. I think programs are going to have to show a level of patience they haven't shown in recent years, as some of these coaches who were used to the old system adjust to this new reality of the portal and NIL.
It's interesting too because you just had this kid flip to Michigan. Apparently, there's like an $11 million.
12. The report that was making the rounds yesterday, $12 million. I don't know if it's true. I know Dave Portnoy of Barstool Sports very publicly said he would personally put $4 million towards Michigan bringing in a quarterback. So I don't know if 4 of that 12 are coming from Dave Portnoy himself. But yeah, I mean, a huge bidding war for Underwood, who was the number 1 quarterback recruit in the country. Who, by the way, watching his film, I don't think he's like a super prospect personally.
All right, so and that's where it's at. I mean, to your point about Lincoln Riley, used to be, and when I was covering USC football, they had to pick anybody in a very fertile recruiting ground there in Southern California. In the span of a year, or maybe even in the same year, they pick up Anthony Munoz from a local high school in Ontario, and down the road out in the sticks there in Rialto, California, is Ronnie Lott. They get them all. They got virtually everybody they wanted.
And Marcus Allen, and the litany of LA kids that used to fuel USC football just goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
But again, those days I think are largely done for as long as the NIL portal era is going on.
All right, so we have 2 picks in the books here. Texas A&M laying 2.5 in the game against Auburn. USC laying 4.5 or 5, and maybe even a little bit more against UCLA, as that line has been climbing in that direction. And you're looking at Penn State and Minnesota. James Franklin in a spot where he usually prospers and has a tendency to pour it on.
Well, again, the major talking point we're hearing this week is that the SEC wants their whole conference into the playoff, and of course, the media being what it is, the SEC is where the ratings and money is. The media now wants the entire SEC conference in the playoff. All these 2-loss teams. And then the logical spot, if you're going to get an extra at large, is for a Big Ten team to go. Most people are assuming that's going to be Indiana if Indiana loses this weekend and gets smoked by Ohio State. But Penn State's sort of in the background as another talking point because they don't have a big name win. Their biggest win is against Illinois. Their only big name game, Ohio State, they didn't get killed on the scoreboard, but if you watch the game, they kind of got killed on the field. And that's been the pattern for 3 or 4 years with Penn State. Every time they play a top-ranked team, not only do they lose, but they lose in pretty much a non-competitive kind of fashion. I think Franklin has avoided that conversation by absolutely taking care of business against lesser teams, and I think he will try to do that in the last 2 weeks. If he gets the opportunity to run the score up against Minnesota, he will absolutely capitalize that. And I think he's going to have the opportunity because Minnesota doesn't do anything particularly well. Below average passing game. Their running game, shockingly, is average at best. And they're not as good defensively as they have been in the past. So I think, given the opportunity, Penn State will absolutely throttle Minnesota. And I think, given a notable advantage along both lines of scrimmage, they will have the opportunity to do so. So look for James Franklin to try to impress the committee and run some numbers up on Minnesota this week.
Triple G and drag going in the Olympics in the women's competition, and we fucking.
I think you had it right. It was Margarito. I think really was the perfect comparison there. Maybe a chance that the gloves were made of plaster too.
Yeah. All right. And thanks for talking me out of that ridiculousness of the 7-team money line parlay.
I mean, give it a shot if you want, but
it's not worth it at the.
Got to go 7-0 for 5-1. That doesn't sound like a lot of positive there.
I'd much rather subject myself to the Luca Panici tip horses, where we
there you go.
Tipped us onto a horse, told us his horse had no chance in the same race, and then won the race and mowed down the horse he gave us. We're like, you would expect this at some Bush League harness track, but not Gulfstream Park. Come on. I mean, that's a whole different level of this stuff. All right, Professor, always a pleasure. Good luck with your plays, and thanks so much, as always, for being with us here on Bury Your Bookie.
You have a great one, Steve.
All right, the professor, ladies and gentlemen. Professor, been getting touched up a little bit this year. Hasn't been his best of seasons. I continue to vouch for him, and I can put this on the life of my grandchildren. Guy's been winning for us forever. He's not in the tout business of any sort. He's not selling any picks. He doesn't even, he doesn't mind giving out some of his plays, but he's heavily involved in this, really does his research, as you can tell. He just happens to be getting whacked a little bit on some of his plays. The logic's always there. And that's what we're here for, too, is just you can listen to somebody's opinion and you can look us right in the eyeball and say, you know what, you're fucking crazy. So we do have the 3-bagger there from the professor, who I think is going to finish with a rush this year, of Texas A&M. That was his big play, laying 2.5 against Auburn. USC, -4.5 against UCLA. And Penn State, laying 11.5 against Minnesota. So good luck, everybody. I hope everybody has a great weekend heading into Thanksgiving week. We'll have probably, we won't be with you on Thursday, but nonetheless, we'll try and get our handicappers to formulate the Turkey Day 3-team parlay. Speaking of ridiculous bets and quest to, or finding 50 ways to lose your money. But always great, right? It's fantastic. The only thing better is if the uncle who you can't stomach gets up and leaves early because he's got some other place that he has to go, and he doesn't even stick around for dessert. That's great on Thanksgiving Day. And even better is, especially now with that third game, if you got by the first 2 and you're sitting there for the nightcap with an eggnog and maybe a little bit of a buzz on, and you're thinking, if I hit this, I'm getting 6-1. So good luck, everybody, through the weekend. We will see you on Monday. Thanks to the professor for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the next edition of Bury Your Bookie.